Do you eat fish or seafood? I do. I eat a lot of it. And so do billions of other people. Maybe you do too. Over 3 billion people depend on fish for their protein, and that number is only going to grow as the Earth's population grows. That's an interesting statistic, too, today in preparing for today's conversation that over 60 million people are directly employed in the fishing and aquaculture industries. That's kind of amazing to me, actually. But our oceans are facing a convergence of forces: climate change, overfishing, and pollution, to name three primary ones. What can we do about it to help keep our oceans safe and feed billions of people? Today, we're going to find out from a master of both the science and the policy side, and the author of a new book all about this challenge. So put on your earbuds or turn up the volume, grab a pen and pad to take notes, and let's get started. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and climate-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, by the way, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my articles as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. One more thing before we get started. If you are at an inflection point yourself, looking for support with your ESG work or your career, please reach out to me in all the chaos swirling around us. There are a lot of opportunities too, and we don't want you to be flailing. Your talents are valuable. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn at Joan Michelson. Tell me you're a listener and let me know what's on your mind. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. So the challenge here in the fish challenge is that fishermen and fisherwomen are business people too, obviously, right? And limiting the success of their businesses is, well, unfair. So we face a conundrum. How do we balance conflicting needs? Isn't that always the problem, unfortunately? Our guest today faced this challenge head on and brought the added component of a personal connection. If I read her correctly, she grew up fishing with her family. But she has also negotiated a creative solution, and I bet her strategy might help us negotiate some other challenges too. So let's find out. I'd like you to meet Amanda Leland, Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Fund, also known as EDF, where she's been for a mind-boggling 21 years. That's amazing. She's also the author of the new book, Sea Change, Unlikely Allies and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions. Before becoming executive director, Amanda held several positions at EDF, all in oceans and ocean policy. She's a scientist and a policymaker as well as an executive. Early in her career, she conducted research with commercial fisheries in Maine, was a marine mammal zookeeper, oh my God, and a congressional aide on marine policy in the House of Representatives. Okay, I want to hear about the zookeeper part. Anyway, she earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Ecology, Evolution, and Population Biology from Purdue, and her master's degree in Marine Biology from the University of Maine. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Amanda Leland to Electric Ladies Podcast. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let's start off with sort of setting the stage here. What the heck is overfishing and why should we care?
Yes. Well, I think you made a really good run at it, which is that lots of people eat fish or seafood. And in fact, probably many of the most vulnerable people on the planet really require this source of protein. They don't have a lot of other options. So from a human perspective, it's important for food. It's really important for nutrition. Babies developing brains need the omega-3s. They need the nutrition that comes from these kinds of food sources. So there's a health component. The reason I got into it is actually more about the environmental side of the equation, which, because I'm a big ocean fan, I love the ocean. I love the wildlife in the ocean. There's nothing quite like floating or diving and just being underwater and it's like being on another planet. And overfishing is one of the biggest challenges that the ocean faces. And when I was in grad school, you talked about my time in Maine briefly, going back in the Wayback Machine to 20 years ago. Overfishing was one of the biggest environmental crises of the time. And nobody really could figure out how to solve it. And it was collapsing ocean ecosystems, taking the wildlife out. And it was collapsing coastal communities around the United States. And generations of families and communities were really being pulled apart because their livelihoods were no longer something that they could count on.
Why aren't the oceans abundant anymore? I mean, I would think that, like other populations, the fish just keep procreating, right? And I understand that there's plastic, which we'll talk about, and there's climate change. But where was the tipping point? Where did it become? Where did it go? What happened that it went from abundant to under threat?
So, I mean, the oceans, for all of pretty much human history, they were believed to be vast and limitless, because we can't peer into the ocean easily and see what's going on, right? So it felt like we could just keep taking and overfishing at its just fundamental level is taking out more fish than nature can reproduce or provide or replenish. So if you're taking out too many, you see the population of whatever fish it is or sea creature it is come down. And what was, so for pretty much all of human history, that was the view. You could just keep taking it out. But then, circa refrigeration and electricity and big ships and engines got bigger on boats. And as sort of the world modernized, it became a lot easier to find these fish. You could put a sonar on your boat and look into the ocean and see where they were. You could have a supply chain that allowed fish to be caught in Indonesia and sent all the way to the United States for consumption and refrigeration. And so all of sort of the modern world brought innovation, and it brought a lot more access for a lot of people to eat fish, especially those who don't live on the coasts. But it also meant that technology helped find the fish better and create a better mousetrap for the fish. And so it was really, this went through the 1950s, and then in the 1990s into the early 2000s was sort of the point at which the U.S. had gone above the threshold of what is replenishable, and we started to see fisheries around the country collapsing. They were declared federal disasters. They were becoming very unsafe, and we can talk about why that happened, what the incentives were that made these fisheries really unsafe. You might recall the TV show Deadliest Catch that was really popular for a long time, based in Alaska. Pretty much all the big fisheries around the United States were in a state of collapse. And so in my view was something had to be done. We can't only stand by and watch the ecosystem and the communities fall apart right before our very eyes.
Yeah, for sure. And then on top of that, you have climate change, right? And plastic pollution. So I see that, and I want to get into what you call fisheries management in the book, and obviously all the marine experts do as well. But talk about, just frankly, as a consumer and as a human, we go into stores or we go into restaurants, and sometimes they label things as sustainable fish. What the heck makes fish sustainable, and what should we look for in that so that we can help you address the challenge?
So there's actually some really good news, which is at this point in the US, if you go to your local fishmonger, your local fish provider, and they have fresh local American seafood, chances are it's sustainable
Hmm.
because of all the progress that's been made in the last 20 years. Now, that's not true always for imported fish that are coming in from elsewhere, because other parts of the world have not addressed the problem the way the United States has. The United States now has the best managed fisheries in the world. That's really a turnaround from the 20 years ago where everything was in utter collapse, which as an environmentalist is actually a pretty rapid turnaround. The problems that I'm usually seeking to address are like, not just generational, but they're in some cases almost timeless. This is the kind of problem that is solvable, and the turnaround happens relatively quickly. It turns out. We didn't all know that 20 years ago. So go to your local fishmonger, buy local American seafood, and chances are it's going to be sustainable. So NOAA is the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration. They are tracking fisheries all the time against a set of criteria, whether they're in a healthy status or an unhealthy status. And today, now, more than 90% of the fish caught in the United States are sustainable, according to NOAA. And there's another one that you could look at, which is the Marine Stewardship Council. It's like a little check mark with an MSC label. And the MSC, just a couple weeks ago, from their ratings, also announced that more than 90% of fish caught in the United States is sustainable from their perspective. So you get two very different kinds of groups looking at different types of criteria, and they're kind of all saying the same thing, which is the incredible progress that's been made should be something that Americans can feel really good about, like going to the store, buying from their local folks, supporting their local businesses, and supporting their ocean ecosystems right off the shore.
I love that. So are those programs that have been so successful at the mercy of the cuts that the Trump administration has been making to NOAA and government policies?
So certainly there are challenges. If you cut the budget of NOAA, you're cutting the ability for fishermen to get access to good data, and the fishermen need good data to be able to engage with their fishery productively. They need good weather reporting. Actually, if they're going to be at sea on a boat, they are very engaged. In fact, the main character in the story Sea Change in the book, his name is Buddy Gwendon, and Buddy was on Capitol Hill yesterday advocating for restoration to NOAA funding. This is a guy based in Galveston, Texas. He is a very unlikely champion, but he is a champion because it works for his business. It's important for his business. And he wants a healthy ocean too. And so what you see when you line up the incentives appropriately, such that the business people in the fishing industry value the conservation of the resource, they become advocates for better science, better monitoring, better accountability all the way through the system. And that's how you get sort of this positive feedback loop that really makes a difference over time and is much more politically durable because everybody can get behind a healthy ocean and what it takes to get there.
We hope so. I'd be curious to see if he's getting involved in the current election season with all the gyrations, shall we say, going on in Texas this year. But I digress. Talk about one of the things that you and Buddy, it looks to me from your book, were able to do was to come to some terms of fisheries management in a way that helped the communities as well as the fishermen, as well as ocean health. And that, as I said in my intro, seems to be there could be some conflicting agendas and conflicting priorities in there. So explain what you were able to achieve and how you were able to do that, including maybe, because we don't want to take money out of the hands of the families, but the economic pressures are kind of competing, is what I'm trying to get at. So, how did you solve some of that? How did you work through some of that?
So the economic pressures were definitely competing 20 years ago when the fisheries were in collapse. So, and this is true for Buddy. I mean, Buddy was counseling his sons out of the business. He would say to them, there is no future in fishing. Even though he was actually the biggest red snapper fisherman in the Gulf. Like, he caught more red snapper than anybody else. He had the most at stake. He had the most at stake when that fishery was in collapse. He was also the most opposed to any kind of change. And in fact, the fishermen, the fishery transitioned from one fishery management model to another. And I should probably talk a little bit about that. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but it helps sort of contextualize what the differences are. So in a conventional management approach, basically what the regulators seek to do is to control fishermen's behavior. That's their way of trying to reduce the catch, because ultimately they have to end overfishing. If overfishing continues, it's just no good for anybody or anything. They got to end overfishing. So what they do is they're like, you can only have this size of an engine on your boat. It's basically trying to constrain their ability to catch more. Or a very popular one, you can only catch this many fish per trip. So if you're a fisherman and you're told that you can only catch so many per trip, you're going to go out and just take more trips, right? That's how you're going to get around that. Like, you're going to follow the letter of the law, but your job is to catch fish because you got to bring home, your livelihood for your family. And so instead of actually focusing on the number of fish being caught, the regulators were focusing on these more behavioral approaches. And what happened is you end up with what's called a race to fish, where every fisherman was trying to outcompete every other fisherman to get as much as they could, as fast as they could before the season was ended. And in all of that frenzy of just trying to catch as much, there's a lot of waste. There's depressed prices because a lot of times the fishermen are hauling back to the dock at the same time, and basically it's a buyer's market, not a seller's market. The quality of fish goes down because it's all done in this very fast, frenzied kind of environment. And that's also why fishing 20 years ago became the most dangerous job in America by a lot. A lot of people were dying at sea because of the regulations that they were operating within that were attempting to control overfishing. In hindsight, it was utter madness. But
that's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But it really is how it plays out over time. And it's it kind of a little bit adds on to a little bit, and the regulatory infrastructure kind of just crushes in. So the red snapper fishery in the Gulf, which is very popular, very iconic, was in a collapsing state. And some fishermen and environmentalists like me and some regulators came together and said, we want to try a different approach. And the fishermen, in order to get buy-in, because nobody wanted to foist this upon the fishermen, they had to vote twice by more than a super-majority to proceed with this new management strategy. And you operate in similar circles as I do, and when do 2/3 of people agree on anything? It's pretty much zero. And fishermen are like fiercely independent people. They are not wanting to follow the crowd. I don't know how else you could be a person that goes out on a boat by yourself for days or weeks on end. Anyway, so the fishermen did vote twice by 80%. To transition to this new management system. And one of the holdouts on both votes was my friend Buddy Gwendon. He said no. So the new management system, I'm going to just say that, and I'll back off, but I think it's kind of important for the story. The new management system is called catch shares. That's the term for it. And fundamentally what it does is it controls individual fishermen's amount that they can catch, not their behavior. So if you think about the total amount that can be caught in a year that science says is okay in the fishery, then you divide up into percentages for each fisherman. You get 2%, I get 4%, he gets 1.5%. And then you know exactly how many fish you can catch for the whole year. And you can do that whenever you want.
But does it limit their livelihood? I mean, why would they allow? I mean, what if the 1% person is able to catch 4% of fish? I mean, that just seems inherently unfair. It sets up a caste system that limits people's earnings power.
So their percentage is based on their catch history. So it's basically what were they catching before, and then they're sort of moved into the system with that. And then there's trading, and there's each one has its own set of rules, but there's a marketplace to create space and for new entrants to come in. So it creates this market. But why it really isn't about limiting, it's more about expanding your aperture, because if as the fish population rebounds, your percentage share might stay the same, but if there's more fish that can be caught, you actually get to catch more fish next year. And so what you immediately see is the fishermen immediately become conservationists, because they know if they keep more fish in the water this year, they'll be able to catch them next year or the year after. And they take, instead of a short-term economic outlook, they take a longer-term economic outlook that's tied with making the pie bigger and bigger and bigger over time, which leads to more fish. And that's fundamentally how we've gone from collapsed fisheries 20 years ago in the United States to so many of them being viewed and labeled as sustainable now.
Oh, wow. That's really helpful. Thank you. Talk aquaculture. Quick funny story. I went to Disney World for the first time only a few years ago. And my favorite part of it was their aquaculture exhibit. I think they call it bringing Earth to life or something like that. And I was so intrigued by it that I took a bunch of pictures and got their script and everything, because, and you see this sometimes on the labels of fish as well, where they grow it. Well, I'll let you explain it better, but it's basically indoor fisheries.
Yeah.
And I would think that would both propagate more fish, but not at the expense of the oceans and the ocean health. So talk about aquaculture for a minute, since we see that more and more.
Yeah, so sustainable aquaculture needs to be part of the solution set for health, for feeding a growing population, and it increasingly can be done well. Like, that's the thing. There's been a lot of innovation in that field over the last few decades also. It also needs to be done in a way that's compatible with the wild fisheries, because nobody wants to upset the progress that's being made in wild fisheries. And there are different types of aquaculture. So, the gold standard, like if you're offered an oyster or a mussel or a clam, like, you can always feel good about those choices, because they are a net benefit to the planet, particularly the oysters and the mussels, because they're filter feeders in the water. So they're like doing the work of cleaning the pollution out, and then you can eat them too. It's kind of remarkable. So, like, always choose that no matter what, because it's always going to be better. And there's aquacultured and there's wild cultured pathways for both of those. Where it's gotten trickier is around finfish, because finfish require a lot more feed that's high protein. And there's differences between doing them in the ocean in sort of these big enclosures, and then doing them on shore, which, yes, also can remove some of the potential pollution and leakage issues you might get in the ocean. But it takes a lot of energy to keep water cool on land. So land-based aquaculture has the energy component you have to think of too, because most fish don't love hot water. Like, right. They have pretty tightly tuned thermal tolerances. That's how they've evolved on the planet. The ocean is has been a pretty stable place for them to live. So anyway, so there are differences, but there are ways to get it right in all of those cases. There's not a one size fits all, and there's not a this is good and that is always bad kind of approach. What I think is important is a lot of chefs and a lot of startup sort of aquaculture companies are getting in the game and looking to make the industry more and more sustainable, which is better for all of us going out to restaurants, because we can't always count on, there's a lot of seasonality in the ocean, and chefs and restaurants want, pretty stable things to put on their menu that they're going to get high quality all the time. I did an op-ed recently with Andrew Zimmern. Do you remember Andrew Zimmern? He did the Bizarre Foods TV show. He's still a big food personality. He's one of the advocates for sustainable aquaculture. And he's got a great new cookbook about that out. So anyway, I think this is an area of opportunity and growth, and it's one where consumers can lean in. And there are a lot of good, smart choices out there now that didn't used to exist.
Right. Thank you. It also sounds like a business opportunity, frankly.
It is, actually.
One of the challenges, too, as I mentioned briefly before, is obviously plastic in the oceans. Conservation, I mean, the metrics on this are just frightening as hell. Conservation International reports that we dump as much as 12 million metric tons of plastic into the ocean each year. And that means by 2050, this is just revolting, that ocean plastic will actually outweigh the fish in the ocean.
Yeah.
Okay, that is unacceptable for 80,000 different reasons. Yeah. What's your take on this balance or this dance of sustainable fish and maintaining ocean health, and then dealing with the whole plastic issue? I mean, I think it was Five Gyres has this visual where they cut open a fish and it actually had plastic in its stomach. Yeah. I mean, it's enough to turn you off, right? But what do we do about it? What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a couple different answers to that question. From a consumer standpoint, again, American seafood is a great choice. You're they're likely to have less of the fish filled with plastic if you're choosing products that are coming from the local American coasts. The gyres collect all the trash of the ocean. It's interesting. You can follow a molecule of water around the entire planet, and it takes 400 years. It actually circulates the whole planet over time, every molecule of water. And so they all end up in the trash all ends up in these big gyres. The Central Pacific is the biggest one. I call it Trashlandia. Someone could write a TV show about it. But the way there's two interventions that are really important to address the problem, because you have to go upstream. You can't just take the trash out of the ocean. You have to stop it from getting into the ocean. So increasingly, there are strategies now to put trash, to deal with the trash coming out of the big rivers of the world. It's coming out of Central and Southeast Asia. It's coming, those are the places where a lot of the trash is coming down in rivers. Somebody needs to create a value proposition for that trash, because until it has value, what are you going to do with it? Like, it's not like we can expect the communities of the Ganges River to just take care of their trash. So there needs to be a viable economic model behind it. But the more we can stop the trash from entering the oceans, the better. And then the second is, there are a lot of companies that are trying to innovate around products so that the trash, the plastics are not, they're not the plastics that only break down into smaller plastics, but they're alternative manufactured things that might be naturally occurring, or farmed products that function the way plastics do. The more we can change the actual products, the less, I think, a problem that this will be over time. So this is another field where there's lots of business opportunities, actually, and there's innovation to be had. And there's a lot of organizations that are thankfully very focused on making progress here, because it is an incredibly difficult problem. And it's one that, it's like climate change, like it has a very long tail. Even if you stopped it at the source today, there's still so much entrained in the system that it continues to break down, that you get this reality in which there's like plastic in every cell of the fish, basically.
Really helpful. It's interesting. I have seen some kind of biodegradable-ish plastic, at least advertised that way, or using non-petroleum products for plastic. And I had Ann Canella on from Niagara Bottling that uses only 6% of plastic in their bottles, but it's, they're still good bottles versus the traditional ones and things like that. The other one that comes to mind is I had Zara Summers on, and she spoke at my Earth Day Women's Summit last year too, who is the chief science officer of Lanza Tech, and they're doing something similar but with CO2. They're converting captured CO2 into something useful, right? Clothing even, which is amazing. And so if somebody can take that kind of thinking and apply it here, that would really be helpful, because there are so many benefits to what plastic has allowed us to achieve in society and healthcare, et cetera. But the downside has got to be addressed. I want to circle back to your negotiation with Buddy, because we're all trying to find another way to negotiate through our differences on so many issues. So if you could kind of go back maybe 80,000 feet up from your negotiations, or looking at it in hindsight, what did you learn about finding common ground in this negotiation that we might be able to use as a strategy for finding common ground in other things?
Yeah, so I think honestly, I think it's pretty simple. In some ways, it's too simple, which is, if you want to get something done, you have to confront the world as it is and the problem that the person you're trying to get on board has to solve for themselves, right? So rather than I'm going to confront the world with my problem to solve was overfishing, but his problem to solve was ultimately he wanted to have a business he could build and grow in his community, right? And even though 20 years ago he was counseling his kids out of the industry, he had a couple guys on his boat. He now runs a business that employs 240 people in Galveston. He is living the American dream. And so the solution, whether he wanted it or not, because ultimately the solution was adopted through this vote that he voted against. But within 3 months, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much better for me." I cut my costs dramatically, because fuel is a big cost for a fisherman. You actually use a lot less fuel if you're not racing against everybody else. So he cut his costs, and he was able to plan and build for the future. And he cares about having a healthy ocean because that's how he makes his living. So a lot of it is about I need to help you solve, as an environmentalist or as a problem solver, confronting it as I need to help you solve your problem rather than I need you to solve my problem. And I think it's sort of an orientation I feel like is lost a lot right now, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the more I think we can help our problem solvers of the world and our advocates of the world internalize that, I'm going to help you solve your problem, I think we're going to, there's so much opportunity for progress. I think it will really make a difference.
Yeah, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think what's behind that is trust, that people need to trust that if I help you solve your problem, my problem will get solved too. Um, I'm so glad you said that, because it's really a conundrum, right? And it applies in every area of our lives right now, with polarization being what it is. But also what I'm hearing you say is focus more on them than on you.
Yep.
And that helps bridge the gap, right? It also, I think, disarms the situation. It doesn't, everybody isn't in their corner, uh, screaming and yelling. I could talk to you for about a week, but I want to ask you a couple other things, and then let you get back to your life. What we haven't really talked about, though, is the Environmental Defense Fund itself. So you've spent pretty much the bulk of your professional career there. It's been an interesting ride. I'm sure you've seen it go through a bunch of different gyrations. I know Fred Nupp. I've met him a couple. I've met him a couple times, a few times. But talk about, for people that aren't familiar with the EDF, talk about what the EDF does, and frankly, how EDF is managing this moment when there's so much political pushback from those in power against the very core of defending the environment.
So we have sort of gotten back to our roots in the last year, which is finding the ways that work. So we are living our sort of our motto every day. And we stay true to our principles. We are deeply engaged in a lot of legal strategy and litigation to stop the foundational rollbacks to public health and environmental policy that this administration, this EPA in particular, has taken on. And we will be there, and we will fight like heck. At the same time, we are a practical organization. And so we are constantly in bridge building mode. Like, we are looking for the pathways to make progress, because if we give up, or we believe that the politics are too hard, or that the decision makers just see the world differently fundamentally, if we believe those things to be true, then they become true. So it's our job to help shape the future and help people see, even our own people on staff and our supporters out there. We've got to help them see the possible. And there's a lot of good stuff happening. And honestly, like, if I could change one thing right now about the world, it would be why does everybody want to talk about the badness?
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
Can't we talk about the goodness? Because there's a lot.
Yeah.
And the badness is demoralizing, and it creates hopelessness. But the goodness builds momentum. And so, there's incredible progress happening on climate in the States. There's practicality around, there's a lot of ratepayers and average, households that are really upset about the price of their energy right now. They have every reason to be angry. This is bonkers. And that's an opportunity, right? That's people rising up and saying, no, we're not accepting the reality that's been handed to us. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. I think it's incumbent on organizations like EDF to help show that there are pathways for progress, and also just to stay true to who we are and what we stand for, which has been consistent for over 50 years. And we will continue to fight. And we'll continue to build opportunity, not just in the United States, but outside the United States, too. I mean, if you go, notwithstanding the current global events that are unfolding in the Middle East, but if you go around the world and you actually talk about climate and clean energy, it's a whole different conversation that's happening.
100%. Yeah. No, that's great. I do the same thing, by the way. And people say to me, "Oh, you must be so demoralized." I go, "No, I live in the land of possibility." I talk to people who are innovating and coming up with cool solutions every day. And well, I don't know if you know this, but I'm writing a book on some of this, which we can talk about sometime. But it's no, I'm focused on all the cool things that people are doing, and how there's momentum, to use your word, to go further, and that this is just a blip on the radar screen, really. And it's funny, because sometimes I get people look at me and they go, "Didn't expect that." So to that point, before I get some career advice from you, what can the public do? What can the media do to help protect science funding? I mean, state people want to have good weather predictions too. I mean, look at what happened in Hawaii. Some of this reporting I saw where people were going, they didn't give us any warning. We didn't have, the weather reports didn't tell us. Well, you take down the weather satellites, and you cut NOAA down to a nub, and people can't get out of harm's way, which actually costs the government more money because then they have to come in. I mean, it's a negative cycle, all to pretend that climate change doesn't exist, which is just insane to me. But what can the public do? What can the media do to help protect science funding, especially for NOAA and National Weather Service? And to your point, a really good point, the regulations from the EPA that are keeping us safe.
Well, I think I would like to believe that the more stories of progress, like how these things actually help people in their regular lives, the more those stories are told and people internalize them, the better. Having the entertainment industry do more to tell those stories as part of regular programming. Like, we should all be very thankful for our local weather people. We should all be thankful for the Weather Underground folks. I don't know, like, there's a lot you can do to build up stories of heroism that are different than how heroes are portrayed today. And I think, people who are doing the good work of protecting American lives and American businesses, like, why wouldn't we want to hold them up and tell those stories in a meaningful way so that it sort of sinks more into the thinking of people that these aren't just government programs being foisted upon us. These are services that the government is providing to us so that we can have stable, thriving communities, because everybody wants a stable, thriving community. Nobody doesn't want the other thing. And I think the more it's localized in that way, and I think the more it's presented not as a political choice, right? I think it becomes more, it doesn't just depolarize it, it actually becomes more part of the fabric of the conversation and people's expectations for what government can do for them.
That's a really, really good point. And it goes to the core of government's job, which is to keep us safe, right? If our water and air isn't safe, we're not safe. If we're not safe from knowing how to get out of harm's way of a hurricane or a flood, then we're not safe, right? So I love your point of talk about the benefits of the program, not sort of an amorphous government program, but give it stories in your community. That's really good. I love that. So before I let you get back to your life, I like to get career advice for mid-career women. So think about somebody who has at least 10, maybe even 15 years of experience. She has an education. She knows what she's good at. She wants to excel and advance and make more money. And she wants to make a difference and doesn't want there to have to be a trade-off. So what advice would you give to her?
Can I have two pieces of advice? One is like super specific and one is a little bit, well, actually, they're kind of both very specific. I don't know. You can decide whether you like these or not. Okay. So one is, and I think this is an undervalued thing, always hire people better than yourself. So I think women don't often, maybe this is true of everyone. I don't know. I'm a woman, so I bring my own experience to this point, which is like getting from early career to really senior. That part in the middle is the hardest part of your career, right? It's crushing because you're supposed to be delivering and showing to leadership what you can do. And at the same time, you have a team, probably a small team below you, but you're still sort of helping them do their work too. And I think if people were to think about how do I really hire someone who's better than me into a job that is going to report to me, which feels a little like, the fake it till you make it thing, but it's real. The less, I think, the more likely you'll be in a position to be able to really rise because you're not being sort of pulled into the work of someone or a role that you've already had before or previously held. Like, it gives you more scope to grow, I think, if you hire people better than you into the roles that report to you. So that's one thing I think is a secret of success. And the other, I had an EDF staffer who I apparently had coached on something at one point, and she said it back to me recently, so I will share it with others, which is, for when women in the workplace want to offer their opinion about what a path forward could be for work or strategy or problem to solve, to not lean in on the like what I think is, but to lean in on the based on my experience, this is how we should do it. And to really key into and own your own growth and your own position and what you have learned along the way. So I think that, the more we as women in the workplace can do that based on my experience, X, Y, and Z, I think the more it creates an environment where we're treated with the respect and fairness that we all deserve.
Well, I appreciate that what you're saying is it emphasizes the experience that you bring. Yeah. What I'm also hearing is something that I say to my consulting and coaching clients as well is have multiple mentors, because each of us brings our own experience and we're coming from our history. And people who, there are people who are going to respond a certain way to me as a, crazy New York City girl. And there are people who are going to respond differently to you from Maine and whatever, or people from, the heartland or whatever your background is, right? And so people are bringing the history of their own choices and the history of how other people have responded to them. And they might respond, your moving through the world might look different. And so if you get input on the same issue from different points of view, from different people who have different experiences, first of all, it makes you not take anybody's advice at face, just, oh, well, that's what Amanda said, so I have to do X. No, it makes you think for yourself. But it also makes you separate out what is their experience versus yours. I had the privilege of working at 60 Minutes, and my producer gave me some interesting advice, but she had been in the industry forever and a day. I mean, literally her entire career. I had spent many years going back and forth with corporate America too. So I came at it from a different vantage point, right? And it's great. I mean, it's good input, but understand the source, understand the experience of the source. But I love your point, which is the more we say based on my experience, that also reinforces the fact that we have experience.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
100%.
No, I love that. The other thing that I'll say in response to your hire people better than you is I think what you're saying is it enables you to not have to micromanage. But I think it also, you have to have some pretty good self-confidence, because they might come up with ways to do the job that you did better than you did. And that takes a grown-up to be able to handle, right?
It takes a grown-up, but it also ultimately you actually end up being rewarded, right? Like if somebody who's doing things better, more efficiently on your team than you did them, even though it might feel like you're going to read it as a reflection that you didn't get it quite right, you actually end up getting rewarded because that person is doing the job better, and it's under your oversight and management support. So I think that's part of like the disconnecting from the personal so much, and making it like, actually, when my unit is successful or my team is successful, then I'm successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it frees you up to do other stuff. You don't have to go back and micromanage and say, no, you're not doing X, Y, Z. Amanda, this is great. Any final thoughts or takeaways from our conversation before I really let you go?
Could I just say that people can go to edf.org if they want to learn more about EDF, and then edf.org/see-change if they want to learn more about the book that stars my friend Buddy Gwendon.
That's great. And that's SEACHANGE. Yes. We want to auditory.
That's good. Yes.
Yeah. That's okay. Sea as an ocean, right? Exactly. So cool. Thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies podcast. Amanda Leland of the Environmental Defense Fund and author of Sea Change. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you making the time. So how do you choose the fish you buy and order in restaurants differently? What did Amanda say that resonated with you? And who are you? I want to hear that too. So post it to us on LinkedIn at Joan Michelson or at Electric Ladies Podcast. We have both. Send us any questions there as well. Tell us you're a listener of Electric Ladies Podcast as well. And you may win a 30-minute complimentary session with me. And subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our amazing guests like Amanda, articles and career advice, and where I'm speaking next. You can subscribe on our website, electricladiespodcast.com. And please remember, you are talented and your ambition is a gift. Seize the opportunities that abound even in this economy, in the intersection of innovation, energy, climate, and sustainability. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.